Yeah, so we have the recording started. So we will go to the HashiCorp Vault website. That is the Vault project. Let me also add the Vault project over here. Add link. So let's see what all is there in the Vault Project IO. So Vault Project is a security products provider. So they have got different products that they have, and HashiCorp Vault is one of them. So the Vault is for secure, store, and tightly control access to tokens, passwords, certificates, and encryption keys for protecting secrets and other sensitive data using a UI, CLI, or HTTP API. So here is the download link which is used to download the Vault. And once you download it, you have to use these commands. kv put secret slash order service at order service JSON. So you have to first create one JSON and embed all your username, credentials, etc. into that. So we will open first the order service. There is this order service JSON. So all of the credentials that we have for the order service database. Okay, let us once revisit the design that we are following. So here we have the product service that is connected to the MongoDB and order service is connected to MySQL DB. So how is this connection happening? The connection is happening by having the DB URL, the DB username and the DB password. So these three things we require for connection of the databases, the MySQL DB and MongoDB. In the case of MongoDB, it is only the database URL, but in the case of order service, we are connecting to MySQL. So we have got username and password also. So we have to first encrypt it using the HashiCorp key vault that is over there. And then the order service will get the details from the HashiCorp server that we are going to boot up on our local system. And that server will then already be having the JSON, the details or the credentials of database in a form of JSON, and that will be then encrypted on the fly and sent to the order service, and the order service will be using those to provide to get the whether to basically connect to the database, and then it will be firing the queries once the connection is successful. So this is the JSON, and we have to use this command kv put secret slash order service. So this file also I will provide in the chat or in the email afterwards. Last time it was observed that in the chat the files couldn't be shared. So I'll send it separately as an email so that these commands get to you. So after you have put the order service JSON and the product service JSON, like this, but before putting we have to first start the server. So to start the server you have to go to the vault location. Wherever you have stored the vault, you have to open that file. Go to the command prompt and you have to type vault server dash dev. So there are There are different ways to start the server. There are different modes to start the server. There is a prod mode, dev, test, etc. So you'll be starting the dev mode because that creates only one particular instance of this vault server. In the prod, there are multiple different other also what I would say the different instances and configurations that get launched. So we need a very basic one. So we have to write only -dev and click on the enter. So now my server is already starting. So this is how it gets booted up. After doing the vault server -dev, it starts to boot up. The API address, that is the local host, and the port is 8200. So we can configure this port if we want. There are different vault commands to configure the port. So if we want it to be configurable, we can do that. And there are these different environment variables that are then internally used. So this way the vault server is going to boot up, and it is going to provide us with the root token. So this root token you have to copy. And these are the two services which are going to use the key vault service. So you have to go to the application properties of each of this. And this is a set of Spring configuration that comes for the key vault for integrating our services with the vault service that is running already on the local host. This is the vault service that's already running. So to integrate them, these are the Spring configurations that are used. So it is the spring.cloud.vault followed by host, port, scheme, authentication, token, etc. So this particularly is the token that we are going to use. So I've already pasted it a few minutes back when I launched. So this is where you are going to put the vault token and the application name kv.enabled is equal to true, and spring config import we have to provide as a vault colon slash slash. So these are the configurations that are required to be enabled for Spring Boot to integrate with the vault application server that is already running over here. And what is the server going to do? It is going to accept the requests and check into its vault whether already we have the key value pairs associated or folders associated to it already. So how to create the folders? By doing by giving this command kv space put space secret slash product service. So secret is a folder inside the vault, and inside that we are creating one more folder called as product service. And what are we going to put into this folder? The contents of the JSON that is followed by this @product service JSON. So let us open product service JSON over here. You have to create this JSON and all the database credentials, whichever you want to encrypt, you're going to remove from the application.properties. We're going to remove that from the application.properties and put inside this JSON. And this JSON we are not going to commit into the product repository, but here I have committed it so that you can get access to it. But this ideally doesn't go as a part of the release package, as a part of any code commit. So it is maintained separately. So we are going to have the database credentials, etc., going into the JSON, and the JSON will be then put inside a folder which is created by this kv put command. So I'll share this entire file after the session so that you can get to see what where we have to fire this command. So over here what I have done, I have went to the product service and we have to execute this command which is present in the vault.exe. So I have given the path up till the vault.exe. Wherever that vault.exe I have got it stored, when you download it, it comes as a zip. You have to unzip it. After unzipping it, it will create a folder. So wherever that folder you have created, you will get access to the vault.exe. And on that vault.exe, we are going to fire the command kv space put. First, we will have to do a put, then secret slash product service @product JSON. Now to confirm that it has actually got put, so this is how it executes. So to confirm that it has actually got put, you can also fire a kv get on the folder, and then you get all the results, all the key value pairs that are stored in this particular key vault. Here we have the MongoDB URI, we have put it. So it gives the key as the key that we have put into the JSON. This is the key from here to here, and from here to here is the value. That is what we are getting to see over here as a key and as a value on doing the kv get. So this is for the product service. Similarly, you have for the order service. So these all commands I will paste into the chat or in a separate mailer for all attendees, so that these commands you will get, and also the command for vault service, start how to start the vault service, this particular command. So that's about the vault service and about these credentials. So once we have embedded these using the configuration of Spring Cloud Vault and doing the KV put, we are all set to start. So we have this configuration that we have it over here. And the next part that we are going to see is the API gateway configuration. So now in the last part, in the last session, we saw that when we are opening any release, what we have to do is that in the variables section, we have to put the port numbers. These port numbers are auto generated. Once it boots up, it gets auto generated. Like for example, let us see in this console. This is where we search for the port number where it has booted up. So Tomcat started on 55868 as a product service port. So product service one instance has started at 55868, and additionally what you can do is you can start one more product service instance. So how to start that? Basically over here, you should get not rerun. Presently it is showing rerun, but you should get a run option. So why that is happening? Because in this configuration, you have to go to edit, and in the modify options, you have to allow multiple instances. So different IntelliJ versions have different ways to allow multiple instances. In some of the previous versions, we have allowed multiple instances right over here as a HTML link, and once you click on it we get an option to allow the multiple instances. In some of the applications we have directly like this modify and we are presented with allow the multiple options. In others we have a checkbox over here where it says allow multiple instances. So that basically you have to allow for the product service and the order service, and you can run it again. So 55868 is for the first instance of the product service. Now we have launched one more of the product service. So similarly, you can do for the order service also. You have to go to edit, modify options, and allow multiple instances. But now, right now, let us go to product service. The instance has already booted up, and it is 5852. So it's different from the 5586. Now, when we have to execute or any of the product related APIs endpoints, then we have put here as product service one port. We saw this last time where we have made variables for the port numbers. We have product service one port, service two port. It is just the port numbers for the instances to capture the port numbers of the different instances. If you tomorrow decide to launch other multiple instances, you can add one more variable over here for the product service too. Like you will have to copy this, you'll have to paste it here, and you have to change this to 3 because this will be the third instance. And then you can write initial value whichever you want, and then the product, and then the port number you can collect from the console. It can be any of these kind of values, etc. And if you want, yeah, if you want, you can drag it and place it over here just for them all to be at one place. So product service instance 123 will be having so and so port numbers. So port numbers right now we saw on the console, but now this is only for 1, 2 or 3 number of instances. When we go in the production, there will be like 20, 30, 40, many more instances. So you can't go about configuring each of these instances and then testing. So for that purpose, what we have to do is we have this API gateway. That's a design pattern of the microservice, which we are going to implement using the Spring Cloud framework. So for that, it is the routing and the load balancing. It is for the routing and load balancing. We are doing service to service calls in the next session. Service to service calls will be done by web client or REST template. So there are the pros and cons of each of these approaches. So that will be, we will be checking into the next sessions. So what we have right now is routing and load balancing, which are done by the API gateway, the cloud gateway mm, jar that we have in the pom.xml. So for incorporating API gateway, we have to create a new service called as API gateway. And in the pom.xml, we are going to add this jar specifically, that is the Spring Cloud Starter Gateway. This we have to add. Now, how to add this? As we had in the last time, we have to go to the starter project, spring.io. Start.spring.io. Here we have the language as Java, project as Maven, and Spring Boot version you can select 330. But sometimes if any functionality doesn't work, you have to downgrade it to 330 or 323 or 318, etc. So presently we are using the 330 in all of our applications. And where to find this version? Over here, if you search in any pom.xml version, so many of the versions get highlighted. So as explained in the last time, this is the model version. That is the POM version, the project object model of the Spring Boot application. It is the version of that. And in the industry, presently we are using the 4.0 model. Then next comes the version. This is the version of your service, whichever service you are presently working on. So this form is belonging to the API gateway service. So that version is 4.0. So that version is mentioned over here. This is the artifact ID, that is the API gateway service, and this is the version of the API gateway service. And then what is this version? This is the Spring Boot version, that is the 3.2.0, 2.2 snapshot. Now here is a properties tag in which you have to mention other versions that you are using. The Java version is 17, Spring Cloud version is 2023.0.0. So these are the versions you will be adding. Java version, if you have a different version, what you will do, you have to first go to the project structure. You have to select a different JDK that you are planning to use, 11 or 17 or 19 or JDK 8, etc. But a very much previous JDKs, they may not support certain of the functionalities. So Spring Cloud publishes a release train. You will find some release train over here. This is the release train. So when you click on each of these versions, these are the Spring Cloud versions. So whenever you click on these versions, you will see what all will work and will not work with this version, which all versions will not work and which will work. We will just open one of them. So these are all related to the Spring Cloud versions. But yeah, obviously we cannot use JDK, say suppose 6 with any of these versions. So we have to be careful about that. So in the issues and all, they will explain which all versions will be allowed and not allowed. But basically, this is what we have to keep in mind, because in each of the pom.xml below, there is also this. In certain cases, we also add like this version. And here we put some 3.1.4, etc. So this version is going to be the version of the Spring Cloud Starter Gateway. Or else, if we have to specify a different version for the Eureka client, that time you have to add the version over here. and specify that version. So once you get into the debugging and all, these issues will start coming, wherein you will get the error message clearly saying that this revision is not compatible with your cloud version. So at that time, you have to make these changes and proceed. But for now, whatever code I'll be giving, it will already have these issues sorted out. So wherever you need a specific version, so you will find the specific version in the code, but in live projects, you will have to ensure that these versions are compatible as per the release train. You might have to go through this release train and figure out if there are any issues in your build, whether you can sort it out that way. So these are the different versions that are present. According to those versions, you have to select the Spring Boot version over here. You have to give the name, whichever name you will be using over here. So yeah, I have kept this as it is, and over here I have given API Gateway Service. Last time what we had given is that we had given over here shift on order service, or we had given here product service. So right now what we are doing, API Gateway Service. Here no need to change the description or the package. The jar, you are going to bundle the package as a jar. So you have to select the jar, and JDK version is 17. And then you can either explore, or you can generate, or you can share it. So let us explore it and see what all is there in the default form. So we didn't include any dependency in it, but by default the Spring Boot has added the starter test dependency by itself. So this we had seen the last time, that it by default adds the starter test dependency, and these are certain plugins that it by default adds into your pom.xml. Other than that, there is no dependency. If we see, there is only one of this dependency, that is the Spring Boot starter also it adds along with the starter test. So these are the two dependencies, and the dependency tag closes out here. So let us now add the dependencies that we need for our API gateway implementation. So over here what we require is the cloud starter gateway and cloud starter Netflix Eureka client. So why do we need to add Eureka client? The last time we saw that we have created a discovery server, and we have made order service and the product service as the discovery client. So how did we make it as a discovery client? We just added this dependency, that's all. So when the application boots up, the server itself reads the Eureka client, and Eureka client has certain starter configuration files which take over, and then it starts listening to the discovery server. The default port of discovery server is 8761. So let us open the Eureka dashboard also. It is present at localhost 8761. So where is this all content coming from at the localhost 8761? It is coming from all of the jars that are bundled, that come along with the Netflix jars. So there is a Eureka client, there is a Eureka server, etc. If you do a control space over here, you will see that this Netflix has got these all bundled inside of it. That you can just search. So this is the dashboard of the Eureka. What it keeps track is, it keeps track of what all are the instances. We saw this last time, that this is the instance name and this is the instance ID generated by the random UUID. We saw this last time. So product service, we have booted it twice. Order service, we don't require to boot it twice. We just need to do some example on the product service right now. And most importantly, this is the new addition. Today's session is about the API gateway service. So once we launch the API gateway service, it has to also interact with what all are the services that are acting as clients to the discovery server, so that it can do the routing accordingly. So API gateway service is going to do the routing and the load balancing. As we have seen over here, there is going to be the routing and the load balancing. So this is a part of routing that the API gateway is going to do. It is going to intercept the incoming call. It is going to intercept the entire URL, the URI that is coming in, and then it is going to decide whether the URI is present inside of the product service or whether it is present inside of the order service. So for that, API gateway needs to listen to all the other services that are present. So it has to listen as a client. And how to enable that? By adding just this jar. That's what we have done over here for the Eureka client. So this API gateway service is also acting as a Eureka client. And there is only one server over here. We have this discovery server. Inside the discovery server, we do not have this Eureka client because the discovery server is not going to act as a client. There is only one Eureka over here, and that is the server. So our discovery server has got only Eureka server. There is no other Eureka over here. So there is only one search result. So the discovery server is a Eureka server, whereas all the other services, except for the config service, are the client services. So they are marked. They have the dependency of the Eureka client in that, and that enables them to be what we could say entered into the service registry of the discovery server. That's how they end up over here on this dashboard. This is the Eureka server dashboard. We saw yesterday, last time, what all these all meant, and these all are the different instances that are tracked. So this API gateway service is getting executed, and this is the instance ID for it. Now going further, what all do we need more to enable this API gateway service? The first thing that we did was the starter Spring Cloud Starter Gateway. So this is a gateway dependency. So how to add this? You have to go to the Spring IO and add over here API gateway. So this is the routing package that Spring Cloud has. It is a jar in which it is all the implementation for gateway is bundled. So we have to add this, or else there is the reactive gateway. I guess it is this one that we require. Let me just cross check. Okay, this is not the one. This is the MVC one. So do not take this MVC one instead. So if you want to remove it, you just have to click on this minus sign. So it goes away, and you have to again search for the API gateway and take the reactive gateway. Now let us explore. And this is the right one. This is the one that we need. So we retain this, and additionally, of course, we need the Eureka client. So how to add the Eureka client? You have to type in Eureka client, and we get to see only one result. So we have to add it, and just for the sake of verifying, we have the gateway and we have the Eureka client, and these all are added by the Spring by default. So these are the two primary ones that will be required for our API gateway implementation. And then you have to click on the download. Once it gets downloaded, you have to unzip and just open it in your MS-06. Sometimes what happens when you open it into the IntelliJ, you do not really what we would say, sorry, they don't get marked as Maven modules. This particular symbol means that it is a Maven module. Also, sometimes what happens, the source file, which is the main application, Spring Boot application file, it doesn't get picked up as a class file. And so when you right click, it does not mention this run API gateway service main. It does not provide you this. Once it does not provide you this, you cannot start the file. So in that situation, what you have to do, you have to go to this main folder. You have to go to the Explorer. Let it open it. You have to go inside, and there is a .idea file over here. So what you got to do is you have to close this IntelliJ from here. You have to close this project. You have to go to this folder and delete this .idea. That's it. And then restart it. Restart means you have to copy this path and you have to open it. How to open it? By using this open. So that way you can open, and you can then right click on this and you get the run option like that. So sometimes it doesn't show it by default. A lot of times it doesn't do that. So you can do this thing if it doesn't show it for you. So here we are having the form.xml ready. So what all other things we have to do? We don't have to add any annotation over here. and we don't have any other file also in this API gateway service. So now how can we ensure that any request that is coming to the API gateway, and one more thing is that once you add this pom.xml, by default in the server against this application, only one instance of the API gateway gets launched. So you can have a multiple like instances of the API gateway service, but we'll do it in the next session. For now, there is only one instance of the API gateway service, but of course there is only one class that is used for started. That means there is no other like parallel API gateway service in our what we would say all of the folder structure or all of the entire environment of our application. So that is because we need only one API gateway at present, and we don't need more than one API gateway. But then in this gateway, there is no setting that is made. Or right now, till now, we have not made any settings. So what all settings we need to do? Because this API gateway is going to act as an API gateway for what? The product service and the order service. So apart from the other regular settings, that is the Eureka instance ID, the application name and random UUID, these are the default ones. So what we have to add is, first of all, Spring application name, you have to give some name, and then the discovery locator. Now you have the Spring Cloud gateway. This is going to be the specific setting for the gateway. We saw over here we have the, for example, Vault. For the Vault, we have Spring Cloud Vault. Similarly, let us close all this, whichever we know don't require. Yeah. So this is for the Vault, Spring Cloud Vault. That is how it is annotated in the Spring configuration. The jars that get bundled with the dash vault package dependency. So they are mapped against these particular configurations, Spring Cloud Vault. Similarly, over here we have Spring Cloud Gateway. So in the POM, we added the dash gateway dependency. So inside that, the implementation has been done such that the the property names are Spring Cloud Gateway. The key value pairs, they are Spring Cloud Gateway dot discovery locator enabled is equal to true. This we have to give because by default the discovery locator enabled is equal to false. So why do we need to enable the discovery locator? Because we have to enable the instances to be discovered by the gateway. So the gateway needs to search for the instances, and let us go, these two will come back again, and we have to do it for the product service. So in the gateway, we have certain things called as routes and predicates. So what are routes? Routes means they enable us to identify which is the application name of the incoming request. So the application name is always going to contain. Let's go to release 3. It's always going to contain one host, one port, and then there will be some or the other of this URL that is followed. And this URL will be mapping to one of the services. This is for the get all products. This is for the order. So which is the application that is mapped against it? So over here, as we see, the Spring application name we have defined in the product service. This is the product service. Inside that, there is the application.properties and the name is product service. So that name we have to provide over here. And similarly, we have to make one URI and we have to mention the product service over here. So now if at all of your names are into lowercase, then we have to mention lowercase enabled. So when we have the discovery locator, which we have already enabled, whether the locator has to go for case sensitive URLs or whether it is going to be non-case sensitive, like in the Postman, are you going to type any of the in caps lock, or you have this name itself written in the caps lock. So it shouldn't become a mismatch just because the case is different. So to allow a lower case, we have to separately mark it as lowercase is equal to true. And here we have LB and then colon slash slash. So this colon slash slash is typically used after the HTTPS. So if we have only one instance, then we can very much give over here as HTTP. But since we are mentioning we have booted up more than one instance, at that time we have to make it as a LB. The HTTPS will not work over here. HTTP will not work. So by mentioning LB, it mentions to the gateway to follow the load balancer protocol and not the HTTP protocol. So in the load balancer, then it internally will be having its registry of product services, and it will be then following which instance to be sent to. The request is to be sent to which instance, that it will be coming up with a ultimate route and gonna hit it then ultimately. Now what is a predicate? So now predicates are the actual paths that we are gonna expect from the client side. So at present we are having only this part API, and say suppose we go to the product. So we have this API slash product dash, and this API version is actually a variable which is defined in the variable section of the release 07, and it evaluates to 06. I will need to remove this actually, but was really tied up. So I'll remove it and I'll share the updated chars. But for now, it is still there. So what it evaluates to is it evaluates to 06. So this URL is having ultimately a slash API. This is a slash, then we have API, then slash, and then product, followed by dash, and then followed by 06, because this evaluates to 06. So that is to be mentioned over here, that we are expecting all the endpoints to start with API product 06, and then it can have any number of character combinations, because we also have get product ID, which is having this as a path parameter. Then we have the different other delete API is also having the ID that comes. So these two APIs, get product ID and delete product ID, this might fail if we do not write the star star. So this star star has to be written to allow the Spring Boot to have any combination after this particular slash. It can be just no characters at all, or it can have any of these like path parameters involved. So this is about the routes and the predicates. So this is an important concept of API load balancer, the routes and the predicates, and this concept of LB protocol. So if at all you are planning to launch multiple instances, you have to mandatorily use the LB colon slash slash. So these are the three important concepts within the API gateway concept, and any of the frameworks will be implementing this in one form or the other. Maybe it can have annotations, or it can have such properties files or YAML files or XML files, or some other way it can be enabling for us to input this. So we are presently doing only the Spring Boot implementation of the API gateway. So we have to make these three settings mandatory, same for the order service. So this completes our this. So if we are using the load balancer, we have to use load balancer dot ribbon dot enabled is equal to false, so that when we are doing a load balancer, it limits its scope to that particular service. That means it focuses on the product service. Over here we have given product service, over here we have given order service. So while routing, while searching, it will search in the routes for different combinations only of the product service. So that is why we have all of these variables to be set into the application.properties. So like that, we have now enabled our API gateway service to get launched in our project environment, so that it can listen to the different endpoint requests that come from the product service and the order service. Now we will try to do one get and set. So we will have our get all products as usual. But before that, one more concept is that now, since API gateway has been incorporated in our system of applications, in all our landscape of applications, Then what is happening now is that on the port 8080, by default, the server dot port for the gateway is 8080. If we go over here in the run and open our API gateway which we have launched, right in the beginning I started it. So it is now running at the 8080, but it is starting on the netty server. So this is starting on the netty server. Why? Because API gateway is going to use the netty server. It has been bundled in the netty server. So it starts on the netty server port 8080. So it doesn't matter which server it is being used, but the HTTP port of our system 8080 is getting blocked for the API gateway implementation. That's all. So we have to ensure that our 8080 is not getting used by any of our previous services. Otherwise, this will give an error on this console over here that 8080 is already in use with other applications. So the by default port is 8080. Now API gateway is going to get the first request. That means over here, whenever we have the Postman client and we are doing HTTP localhost 8080 API product, this is what is gonna hit at the API gateway. So API gateway internally it is going to reroute it to either the product service or the order service or any other service depending on the routes that we have defined. It is a list of routes. That is why we have to put into square bracket the index of the list of the routes that we have already done. So according to that, it will then decide which of the route to take. But it itself, that means the API gateway itself is running at port 8080. So now what we have to do is that we don't have to bother about what is the port of the product service, what is the port of the order service, because that is now the responsibility of the API gateway. It will be keeping track because it is launched in the landscape of discovery clients. So we just have to mention 8080 over here. We have to go in the Postman in the variables. We have already all of this product service 1 2 for each of the instance. That is for the instance 1 we have this particular, and for the instance 2 we have this particular. So now we have two instances launched, one for the product service 1 at this port and the other for this port. But after our API gateway configuration has come into picture, what we're gonna do is that we are going to use 8080 for all of the ports. Now all of these ports are going to use only 8080 because the requests are going to be routed via the API gateway application which is booted up at 8080. So same URLs as previous, only thing is that this variable will evaluate to 8080 instead of any of the 54568 etc. port numbers. Now it will be 8080 as per your configuration over here in the variables section. All of this is gonna become 8080. So let us run one of this. Okay guys, one more thing now. Let us go to the MongoDB. Last time I had mentioned that there's one additional database that gets booted up. So that gets booted up automatically by the Spring because it has got an internal, what you would say, code to create the MongoDB repository. So that gets fired. The MongoDB jar that we have added, it itself has a code to create the repository by its own. So now what has happened is that this product this product service is having this 309. And where is this 309? It is coming from the test DB. This is something that the service has created by its own. And why it has created by its own? Because it couldn't find this URL. When it booted up, it didn't find this URL. And so it created this repository and created one product instance, what we would say, one repository inside it. The document, product document, it created inside of it. And what we are going to hit over here is all it is hitting the test, whereas we require this particular repository. So we have to delete this test and then refire the request, it comes as empty. But over here, you see that this product repository is already over there and it is having one entry. So, why it has not picked up that particular entry? So, let us go into the code. Let us restart our product service. Yeah, so the product service has started and the port is. So over here you see a lot of things. Now we have also RabbitMQ added into this code. So this single jar I will give you. So this jar will contain API gateway also, config server also, and the RabbitMQ integration also. So we'll see about RabbitMQ integration after API gateway. And but it will come in this console RabbitMQ. That is why you will see, because it is implemented as a Spring Cloud buzz into the application node properties. So we have this discovery client, because the product service is a discovery client. So we have in the console discovery client and registering application product service with the Eureka server actually. So this what is meant is that with Eureka server, that is what is meant. So it sends a request to the discovery server for it to get registered, so that the discovery server becomes aware that this is an instance being booted up at so and so port, which is the port, this port of our localhost. So the product service is up and running. And yeah, let us have a look at the DB details that are over there. So over here we see the driver, and let us try to search if there is a DB URL also over here. Let us search for 06. Okay, it's not there. Okay, nowhere it has mentioned it, but let us still go ahead and search it. So this time it has picked up the 16 that is present in our MongoDB repository, that is present over here. The actual repository, not the test one. The test one gets created automatically by the Spring Boot service. So if that happens and if you realize that there is this test, then you have to delete this and you have to check your configuration and all, and you have to enable the configuration so that the actual records get picked and you can see those records. You can do a get by ID, and then you can do a create product. Let us create this as 17 and send. So this is what we are going to input into the document. Let us refresh this and you get 17 added into this product service 06. Now we are connected to the correct database instance. So this is about, and all the ports are converted to 8080. As we see over here, the product service to port is getting evaluated to nothing but 8080. So that means that this particular request, the endpoint is going and hitting the API gateway that we have implemented over here and is running on the port 8080. It is important to launch it. It should run it so that it becomes aware about all the other services that are running in our ecosystem of our landscape of applications. So presently we have two microservices. So wherever you are gonna deploy the API gateway service, in that environment you should have order service and the product service already implemented. So also one more thing is that microservice is about mm, having the microservice patterns implemented in our landscape of products. So how you implement it is up to you, whether you want to use Spring Cloud or whether you can use any of the other frameworks that were listed in the PPT. We had this. So it can be this Micronaut, Oracle Helion, Python, Node.js. All of this have microservice packages, and those packages can be then employed in your application.properties or such and such properties each of these frameworks has for itself to implement the different microservice features. Or there is one more way is that you can have the microservices deployed as microservices by your like for example DevOps environment. So if you have a DevOps environment, it will be using different clusters for each of the service, and inside those clusters it will be booting up multiple instances which will then be having a API gateway for itself. So this all can be implemented during different frameworks or different ops frameworks. It can be implemented. So what we are looking at is only and only the Spring Boot. Mm. So we have seen the API gateway and implemented it in our product. Now we move ahead to our next concept, that is the we have seen the HashiCorp Vault and its configuration. We have seen the API gateway. Keycloak will do next time. So we'll check about the Spring Cloud Bus. So what is the Spring Cloud Bus? Let us check about the Spring Cloud Bus. You can go into this Spring IO projects for reading more about the Spring Cloud Bus. So as long as Spring Cloud Bus AMQP and RabbitMQ are on the class path, any Spring Boot application will try to contact a RabbitMQ server on localhost 5672. So the way the discovery server by default runs on 8761. That is the port for our discovery server dashboard. Also 8761 is the default port at which the discovery server runs. Over here we made the servers listen to the port, or rather it is a by default configuration, so it is not required to be mentioned as a discoveries port. So I may not have even mentioned, yeah, we don't need to mention the Eureka port that we are going to connect to. So that's why it is not mentioned in the clients, but the by default port is 8761. If you have to override it, you have to change in the discovery server, and parallel change you have to do in the client services also. So likewise, we have the AMQ. Now we are going to see the RabbitMQ. What is the RabbitMQ and how does it function in our present landscape of systems? That is our present landscape of this particular design that we are doing. So how does the RabbitMQ, where does it come into picture? So presently we have seen that centralized configuration we have implemented in the Git. What is the centralized configuration? It is the removal of configuration properties from the individual services and outside into a Git repo. So we saw last time whether it can be a Git repo, it can be a file server, or it can be FTP server, or it can be any other source like a database or a small microservice itself, which will be as a layer on top of a database. So any of these sources can act as a configuration repo. So in our case, we have seen that the configuration repo has been moved to the Git. So in the Git, we have these properties mentioned in this repo. And this repo I have given into the code also. So this repo you can find, but you have to create your own repo. You cannot use this repo. So you just create a repo, add two files into it of this particular name. This name you have to follow. Product service dot properties only you have to make. This service you can this repo you can make your of your own. Any of the repo you can use. Put these two properties files into that, so that the configuration gets shifted from your code into the Git repo. Product service, all configuration will be put into product service properties, and order service, all of the order service properties that we have over here, sorry, will get shifted into the configuration, the Git repo. And once you do that, you have to add the actuator. The last time I think so we have completed the actuator. Yeah, I think we last time did the actuator. So these are all the actuator endpoints. So once you implement the actuator by having the actuator dependency incorporated into the code, let us open the pom.xml. So all of the service methods, service implementations, they have this actuator. So actuator, what it does is that it opens an endpoint. Once you launch the microservice, now over here it is the order service. So once it launches, then you get this set of actuator endpoints enabled by default. So this is for the order service, but you can have similar for the product service. You can replace this port number by the product service port. But right now we don't have the actuator because we are having the API gateway. So in the API gateway, we are already running it on the port number 8080. Let us still, yeah, it is not over there. So because we are having the API gateway, so we have to configure the API gateway to have the actuator instead. So let us see if that actuator is present in the API gateway. So it doesn't seem to be here. So next time I'll add it so we can test all of these actuator endpoints on our API gateway service. Yeah. Rather than the order service or the product service. So that's about the API gateway. But instead of that, what we are going to add is the RabbitMQ. So I think so the RabbitMQ. Yeah, so in each of the client services, we are going to add the AMQ related jars. That means we have this AMQP, that means the message queue related jars. This is the message queue related jars we have to add in the class path so that it can act as messaging broker, and it will be listening to one particular git repo for example, and it will be publishing to whoever has subscribed to it. Now RabbitMQ, what we have to do after we install it, one more thing, after you install the RabbitMQ you have to go to the services, or rather you have to tell the person who is installing the service ticket, whoever is resolving, you have to tell that person that it has to be installed as a part, as a form of service. That means when you boot up the when you open up these services, it should appear in this list like this as RabbitMQ. That is what we aim to do, so that it automatically keeps on running, rather than we have to launch it, we have to find the folders etc. Rather than doing that, it launches by itself. So it's having a bit of complicated process. So that is what is about the RabbitMQ. You just have to boot the server up and your system will start listening to RabbitMQ. Another thing is that this each of these services, you have to add this AMQP jar inside this, and in the application.properties you have to add these. This is for the RabbitMQ related configuration. What is the host? This is the configuration provided by Spring. The host, what is the host, what is the port, what is the username and password of the RabbitMQ. So the host of course is localhost. The port, by default port we will take, that is the 5672, And the username password have to be by default. The default username password are guest. So these are the four configurations we need to add inside the our services, the product service and the order service. Over here. And when we are incorporating this, we have to ensure that our configuration files are checked into the Git repo. So last time we saw that the code for this I had shared already. So this is a release 07. I think I have already shared the code. So the same code, yeah, the release 07. So release 07 contains the updated 07.zip, contains the updated code of our today's session. So it's already, you have it. It's already shared in about chat. So the code for it has been shared. Now inside the code, you will have the postman. So you have this postman file, you have to import it like the last time we did. You have to import it, you have to rename it. It will be creating like this contact testing copy. So you have to rename it to the release 07 and then open it, and you get all of these endpoints available for testing. So today we will be testing the get all products, and we will convene our session today a little bit. So what we can do is, just one second.